So I took some time out to speak to a friend, Jodi, whom I have known for quite some time, and also a Black Swan, a sister in this community. And she had a lot of very, very interesting things to share with us about neurodiversity in men. It was actually surprising that many of us have probably dated a man who's neurodiverse or autistic. Now, I want you to pay close attention to this interview because Jodi knows her stuff, and I'm just going to read her bio because I don't want to miss out absolutely anything. So, Jodi is a leading world expert in adult autistic relationship dynamics and communication. Her intensive coaching model and groundbreaking Crack the Communication Code curriculum is helping partners and couples finally get clarity and focused direction in their lives. Her background as a therapist and relationship coach, plus her very own, very close personal relationships with autistic partners, family members, and friends, positions her to understand neurodiverse relationships like no other professional can. If you're a partner or a couple seeking help or a professional seeking training for working with neurodiverse couples, contact Jodi at gethelp@jodicarlton.com or visit her online at jodicarlton.com. Thank you so much, and now for the interview. Now that we all know who Jodi is, let's move right into it. And Jodi, first question for you. Can you describe a neurodiverse man? Who is he? Who is this person? Some of us have never ever heard of such a thing. So just keep it really simple for us very basic people, please, Jodi.
Oh gosh, it's not a simple question. It's a complicated answer, but I will summarize it for you as best I can. So neurodiversity, first of all, is all around us everywhere. We all know people who are neurodiverse, and you may not know that you know people who are neurodiverse, but you absolutely do. So neurodiversity is a word that's only kind of come on the scene in the last 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. But this just has to do with the way the brain works differently. So we've got neurodiverse and neurotypical. Mm-hmm. Typical being just more of the average, more average way that the brain works. And when we talk about the way the brain works, we're talking about thinking, logic, and so communication, but also emotion, the language of emotion. And I call it a language. So how we interact with each other using communication and logic and thoughts and also emotion. So the neurodiverse man mm-hmm. is someone who uses his brain differently to interact and communicate and to convey or receive emotion. Mm-hmm. So this is very applicable to the dating world. Yeah. And so who is he and what does he look like? So you've also heard the word autistic. And yes. So neurodiversity and autism is pretty much one and the same. Now, some people who have ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or ADD, also consider themselves neurodiverse in a way. But for my specialty, my expertise is the type of neurodiversity that is autism. Right. And a lot of people think of autism as being someone who had a lot of your viewers or followers may have heard of the show Love on the Spectrum, or may have seen some of the TV shows that have autistic characters. And those are always really exaggerated stereotypes. Now, Love on the Spectrum has real people mm-hmm. who are neurodiverse, but they're typically featuring the level of autism mm-hmm. that has some level of intellectual disability or impairment, but there are different levels of neurodiversity. And so your ladies mm-hmm. are, and men are likely dating people who are neurodiverse, what we call level 1. Wow. And so what this looks like is we've got engineers, accountants, financial guys, wow. lots and lots of engineers, tech guys, people who are very logic oriented. So those folks who like the Myers-Briggs or the personality profiles, those are going to be our ISTJs, INTJs, mm-hmm. Those types of personalities that are just really, really logic oriented. Yes. And that really think they're very rule based and structured and kind of can be a little bit rigid about those types of things, yeah. but really go through life thinking more than feeling. And so if you think of the types of careers, because a lot of the folks I work with are very, very, very successful in their careers and their jobs, but then struggle some in their relationships because of all of the emphasis for them that's put on logic and a lot less put on emotion, because some of them don't really have that language of emotion nearly as much. So a neurodiversity does not have a look. It's not there's not a physical look to it. So there's you can't look at someone necessarily, but sometimes there are physical traits. Sometimes people walk on their toes a little bit. They're just different types of that's a sensory thing. People who are neurodiverse tend to have sensory differences. So this has to do with brain thresholds and how our brain takes information from the senses. So if you're dating someone who's a really picky eater, or really doesn't like the way certain clothes feel on their bodies, like so they like to cut the tags out of clothes, or they only like to wear the certain kinds of clothes, or maybe their wardrobe still feels like it's in the 80s, and you're like, we got new fashion now, and but they're like, this feels good, this is what I want to wear this all the time. Or maybe sounds, noisy places, concerts, going to supermarkets are very bothersome to them. And it may just seem like they're being overly dramatic, but really it's the way their brain is processing those sounds, and it can be very painful. A lot of times eye contact is very uncomfortable for people who are neurodiverse, and just looking at faces, but looking at faces can be really uncomfortable. Smells can be overwhelming, which can really, all of these sensory things, by the way, can really come into the play in the bedroom. And so a lot of couples get confused with when they're starting an intimate relationship, and a neurodiverse man may have very structured ideas or rigid routines about sexuality, or ideas about sexuality. And some of that may be related more to just needing some structure, or also not really knowing how to go about step 1, step 2, step 3. Some of that is just dudes. Sorry, guys, not to pick on you, but some of that is sensory too. They may be overwhelmed by taste. I dated a man on the spectrum who could tell if I changed my toothpaste when he kissed me. He said, "Oh, you've got new toothpaste," and I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, it tastes different." And I'm like, what?
Wow. How does a girl know when her man is neurodiverse? What are some of the signs that your clients come to you, the wives or girlfriends? What do they say? What are some of the typical things?
Yeah, some of the biggest, when it really starts to show up, is in the communication breakdown, because that's where the brain is really different in how we process communication and we process language. And so one of the major differences is those of us who are neurotypical, we have all of these non-verbal parts of language. It's nonverbal. So the way we use our bodies to speak to others, the way we communicate with our eyes and our facial expressions, you might change the way you're looking at somebody, and that communicates your something else about what you're saying. It may communicate that you're interested, or that you're bored, or that you're angry. Even the way you move away from somebody, you may be you're indicating that you're ending the conversation, or it's about over. Those are all part of nonverbal language communication that neurotypicals use. People who are neurodiverse or autistic don't, just for whatever reason, don't inherently learn these nonverbal language interactions, and don't even know they exist, a lot of them. So a lot of couples get really confused. So they'll think they've had a conversation about something, and then an argument will happen later because they'll each walk away from that conversation having totally different meanings or understandings of what was communicated, because these nonverbals are not read. And then the interpretation, when that argument, it feels like gaslighting sometimes. And I don't know if you talk to your audience about that, but gaslighting is when you believe that a certain conversation happened or an agreement was there, and then somebody else says, "No, I didn't say that," or "That's not what we said." And you're like, "Yeah, I know that's what we said. I know that's what happened." When really it's just a very, very different perception of what's happened, and nobody's trying to do any harm. The neurodiverse individual is not trying to intentionally deceive, but it can be very confusing. And so that's that's usually one of the first signs. Or a lot of partners that are neurotypical will see their boyfriend or girlfriend struggling with others, struggling to recognize those social cues, sometimes struggling to know when maybe what's socially appropriate in a particular situation. And that's when they'll see that they're a really good, decent human being, and that they're not trying to be a jerk, but they just completely misread a situation. And that's when people start researching, and then they end up finding me. Going, what is happening here?
I remember when we had a chat, I was dating this guy, and I was like, "Jodi, And he was in every way. And I think we spoke a little bit earlier before we started recording about the really kind of, I think you said Bill Gates and really kind of geniuses, and Steve Jobs, and kind of would fall into that whole sort of category. And he was very genius, very, very, very smart, very put together and very stable. And I think he was saying that women who've come from traumatic relationships are going to be naturally drawn to these guys because they're very stable, they're very logical. And I think it was quite similar for me, because I was like, I love that he's so stable and so readable. Like I like men who are this way rather than this way, because that created a lot of stuff coming from a traumatic relationship, a difficult relationship prior. So I kind of started to notice that I was like, this is really hurtful, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't mean to hurt me, which was really bizarre. Mm-hmm. Like, it was like, I actually know from your intent and the way that you are, you don't actually mean to hurt me, but you don't seem to understand that it's hurtful. You just...
Yes. That word that you just used, intent, is a word that I communicate to people all the time when they ask me, how do I know if this person is autistic or if they are toxic? Are they narcissistic? I actually have an entire webinar course about this.
Wow.
To help women figure out, is this an autistic? Is my partner autistic or narcissistic? Because that an intent is such a key thing. And what you just described is exactly what women are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Because it creates what's called cognitive dissonance in someone, because you're feeling hurt and it's confusing, but then you see that it doesn't feel intentional.
No,
it doesn't feel like, because with a narcissist or someone who's really abusive, it feels intentional. You know that there's a dig there on purpose, and that you can kind of see pleasure. You can see that they're getting something out of hurting you. There's a payoff there for them.
Yeah.
But with an autistic person, there's like this lack of awareness sometimes, or a lot of times, that what they've said or done is hurting you. And then when it's brought to their awareness, there's a lot of confusion and oftentimes defensiveness, because they have no idea that what they've done or said is hurtful. And so then they feel criticized, and they're like, what are you talking? What do you mean? Because they know they didn't mean to hurt you.
Yeah. And I love, this is why I kind of really wanted you here, because I think that we live in a world where everyone's a narcissist and no one's really kind of having this deeper conversation about actually, because I was convinced he was a narcissist until I sort of started listening to some of your stuff. And sort of my sister actually dated a guy who was on the spectrum. I think he had Aspergers. And she actually is the one that, because she's obsessed with mental health. She actually diagnosed him, but he didn't tell her. He knew he was Aspergers, but he was, again, very successful, loads of money, very powerful, very handsome, very well put together. But she noticed that when they would go for dates, he would only go to certain restaurants and sit only at certain tables at certain times. And he had certain methods in the bedroom that he followed through on. So she was like, I think he Asperger's. But with that, so she kind of gave me some information. So I was kind of thinking, I think this guy is this way. But obviously many men are not diagnosed. They're not clinically diagnosed. So they probably don't even know.
A lot don't know. And just to clarify for you and for everybody else listening, Aspergers, autism, it's really all the same thing. And in different countries, there's different, there are different categories and different labeling. I know here in the US in 2013, they rolled that Asperger's diagnosis under the autism umbrella. We already knew it was an autism spectrum diagnosis, but they were distinguishing it differently for this level 1 category that you and I are talking about, because we knew there was a different level of intellect, and not everybody are geniuses. Not everybody who's in this level 1 Asperger type category has that high level intelligence. Yeah. But most of them in that category are, have finished primary education, whatever country you're in, whatever that's called. Here it's high school. A lot have finished college. Most have careers and jobs. Now, some of them may have struggled somewhat in those jobs because of the communication difficulties. And sometimes it's an all or nothing kind of thing. They've either been very successful financially, career-wise, or because of what we call executive dysfunction, which is like planning, organizing, tasking. They may be very intelligent, but struggle with holding a job because of some of the communication difficulties and peer interactions, coworker interactions. So they may have a string of job after job after job. You may see some of that.
Wow.
I do want to circle back though to what you were saying about trauma, because you and I talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but I think it'd be really helpful for your listeners to hear. I do see a lot of what I call step down, and I don't mean that a relationship with someone on the spectrum is a downward quality of relationship at all. But people, a lot of women especially, and men too, come out of abusive relationships with someone who truly is narcissistic or toxic or borderline personality, to just throw out some labels. Toxic though. And they will be very attracted to someone who's neurodiverse, because there does appear to be emotional stability. There's not this, like you said, this roller coaster of emotional drama. And so much of that is because of that emotional language that's not spoken as much. I told you before we started, I used the analogy of taking a second language. I took a second language in my high school and a few semesters in college. I took French, and I might be able to say a few phrases. If I go to France, I could probably find my way to the bus stop or the bathroom, the things they teach you. But I'm not fluent in French. And so in emotion, men who are neurodiverse know some words and some phrases, and they understand emotion exists, but they're not fluent in emotion. And so they seem very stable. Now, they may have very intense emotional moments when their sensory system is overwhelmed, but in terms of relational emotion, they're not going to be the jealous guys. They're not going to be the really intense. They're not going to love bomb. They're not going to be really coming at women hardcore, intensely emotional in the early stages of a relationship. Now, some of them may have scripts that they're following because they've learned dating scripts. And so they're following, and it's not inauthentic necessarily, because we all follow scripts. You teach scripts.
I give away scripts.
So, a lot of people are like, well, it doesn't count if it's a script. No, it counts. We all follow scripts. But some of them may follow dating scripts. And then once they get into a longer term relationship, not really have a script for that. And so women sometimes get married or get into those longer term relationships and go, what happened to the guy I was dating? And that happens in neurotypical relationships too. So I feel like I'm just going and going.
But keep going. I'm just sitting here learning. So what are kind of give us an example of these dating scripts in terms of what sort of stuff do they kind of learn that they sort of drop when they kind of...
So it's really going to depend on the guy and where he's lived, the culture he's grown up in, because autism does not discriminate. It's across all cultures, ethnic groups. We see it everywhere. So a lot's going to depend on what the family, even what type of what he's seen, what he's heard in his religious faith, even. So it may be the romance, how to date and court a woman, who pays, who, just what that's supposed to look like. And so it can just really vary depending on the man. So it's hard to say what that script's going to be, because it can be so different for each person. But I think what's really important though, is to have conversations about what are your expectations for our role? What do you see your role as being, as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend, as a husband, as a father, what do you see that looking like? And a neurodiverse person may struggle with those answers. If they don't have a script for that. And that doesn't mean they can't be a good husband or a good father, but it's so important to start these conversations early to see how much insight they're able to have about themselves. I want to emphasize that neurodiverse relationships can and do succeed. But I always tell all of my clients it takes ability, willingness, and motivation for any relationship to succeed. And some people, neurotypical or neurodiverse, are just not, they don't have the tools to be in a relationship. And that's true for neurotypical people too.
Absolutely.
And those conversations are important to have when you're dating. And if you see that someone doesn't have the ability to be insightful, introspective about themselves, to learn and to grow, believe them. We need to believe what people are showing us about themselves. And so that to me is an important piece of advice for everybody.
Wow. We're going to have to steal you for a day. Now, just before I get into more questions, like the questions I sent you, because, you know, this is really exciting, interesting to me. Do they fall in love? Do they feel what everybody else feels, even though they don't have the language? Do they feel it though? Are they capable of that?
I think falling in love is a really relative term based on the level of emotion that any one person feels. Mm-hmm. And so my autistic folks that I've worked with have a range of what love means to them. And so when I've asked, you know, I talk about how we use the word feeling and emotion interchangeably, because emotion typically elicits a physical sensation when we experience it. We feel it somewhere in our body. Mm-hmm. So when I ask people, where do you feel whatever that, you know, where do you feel love in your body? Where do you feel anger? Where do you feel fear? Most neurotypical people can identify different places that they feel it. So for love, you know, I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my stomach. What does it feel like? It feels warm. It feels tingly, you know, so there's a feeling associated with it. So a lot of autistic folks have what's called alexithymia, or they also have interoceptive difficulties, which means they struggle to identify internal physiological sensations. This is part of their sensory differences. Or they struggle to identify those emotions that are connected to those physical sensations. Right. So feeling love sometimes is complicated for them because they may not associate that physical sensation that those of us who are neurotypical, when we feel that giddy, you know, I feel close and connected and I feel warm, they may really go, I don't know what you're talking about. And that can, then if you're neurotypical and you have a partner saying to you, I don't know what you mean, that hurts, you know, I mean, you're laughing because you're like, oh, that wouldn't go over well, you know? Yeah. But it's not a dig. It's not a slap, you know, it's not intentionally to harm, but it's truly a language that they don't understand, or it's a sensation they don't relate to. That said, my autistic folks, when they are in a relationship, they're committed, they're loyal. They very much want the best for their families. You know, the well-being of their families is very important to them. So love for them is just defined differently a lot of times than it is for neurotypicals. It's not nearly as feeling based as it is almost provision. It's provider, safety, loyalty, that kind of thing.
Sounds like a masculine man.
In a lot of ways, yeah, you know, especially, yes, for men especially. And now women on the spectrum oftentimes are, because women, we come into the world hardwired differently. Right. We're hardwired more emotionally. And so women on the spectrum oftentimes are a lot more in touch with that language of emotion. Okay. And it can be, if you think of a volume dial on a radio, for women, it can still be turned down a lot more than for women on the spectrum. But a lot of women are going to be a lot more able to relate to emotion than men on the spectrum.
So how do they choose? How do they choose who to love?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So men on the spectrum really, really are attracted to women who are very independent and very capable, because their lives are, they really need routine and structure and stability in their world, because their brains are overwhelmed by their sensory systems are overwhelmed. That's why the man that your sister dated wanted the same restaurant. They need that routine because their brains are constantly having to process what's coming in constantly. Wow. So they need women who are capable of managing themselves and don't really need need them to manage their partner. You know, men they're not going to be attracted to a woman who's very, very unstable and needing a lot of help from them. So they really love to women who are independent in their jobs and their careers, are maybe, you know, if they're divorced and have children, that are real capable moms. So a lot of the women that I work with are those, they're just single moms killing it, you know. Yeah. And autistic men love that and really respect that about these women. And potentially problematic thing can be that when those two get together, the woman's looking for a partner and he's looking more for you know, you got it. You know, he's not necessarily seeing himself as partnering with her and all that. He's seeing them more as being in parallel lives. And it's not that he won't be able to partner with her, but it's important to have those conversations to make sure you're on the same page.
Wow. So let's get into the rest of the questions.
Okay.
Moving on, segueing in, we're going to have you back because I really want to have this conversation about narcissism and autism. And I want everybody to go and do your course, because I'm going to do the course, because this is really, really interesting. I feel like in my family, we're very kind of powerful, strong women, and we always tend to, because my other sister was with a relationship. So we kind of all have this kind of history of having autistic men in our lives somehow, because we're just so capable and competent and so together.
I tend to go through autistic men myself, and I'm still single and not really interested in dating right now. I'm trying to get my kids raised, but I'm fully prepared that I'm going to end up with an autistic man, and I'm okay with that, because they're wonderful human beings. But there are those of us that it's just, there are people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said that, Jodi, because I feel like somebody might be watching this and thinking, hell no, I can't deal with all of that. And to be fair, I think you said this a little bit earlier, they are actually decent men. They're not
they're wonderful
moronic men. They're actually wonderful, decent humans. It's just that you have to communicate differently, and you have to be more aware when you're with them. Because I found when I was with that particular ex, when it occurred to me, because obviously there was no way I was ever going to suggest that he get tested, because he would have probably not liked it. But when it occurred to me, I knew that I had to navigate around him a little bit differently, and sort of not take a lot of things to heart. And I knew that I was doing that consciously, not necessarily being a doormat and just accepting stuff. It was kind of like, okay, he actually doesn't mean that. So just say to him, that's not kind. Can we be kinder, please? Mm-hmm. And he would be like, oh, I didn't think that, I'm just, but he would, eventually learn. But actually he wasn't like a bad human. He wasn't a horrible, because I'd been in a narcissistic relationship before. So I kind of knew the difference.
Right.
Like you said earlier, it's in the way you kind of feel it in your gut that this is malicious, and then you kind of think, oh, this is malicious behavior. And then with a guy who's who's neurodiverse, you feel like, oh, he has no clue really that's painful, because his face doesn't change, and like they maintain the same disposition. And at first he would say to me, you shouldn't be a victim, because he didn't understand. And I was like, I don't understand. It's like you always seem like a victim.
Yes, that's something that and that contributes to the feeling gaslighted. And so women who've been in trauma, toxic relationships, then that's like sets off all the triggers, and
alarm bells.
And yes, exactly, because that's now I'm being gaslighted and my reality is being denied. And but so neurodiverse men sometimes will misread a neurotypical woman's emotional reaction. That's a very normal, if you will, emotional reaction. Yeah, because he doesn't understand it. And so he will see her as being a lot of the things that I hear from neurotypical partners. And my neurodiverse guys have totally said, yeah, I totally say that, is, you're too sensitive. A lot of women have been accused of being bipolar, because they're like, your moods are like, you're all over the place. And because men don't understand just a basic range of emotion. That this is the man that I dated, actually, that I was referring to a minute ago, told me I was bipolar, and I'm like, I am so not bipolar. That is not, I just have I have emotions, and they're I have feelings that you don't understand. You just don't have them. And so there's no frame of reference. So it's like someone who is blind doesn't have the vision. You are not blind, and you're telling them all about what you're seeing, and they don't realize they're blind. They don't know they're blind. They don't know they can't see. Yeah. And they're like, what are you talking about? That's not there. It's like, So yes, it can be really, really confusing, especially when neither partner knows. Yeah. That somebody's neurodiverse.
Exactly.
It's like, no, it's like you're trying to, it can be really, really confusing.
You have to be really paying attention. And this is where I think in general relationships, like neurodiverse, neurotypical, if we're committed to paying attention, and I always say, not just to what's coming out of your mouth, but their energy, if you just pay attention, you will see the signs that this is not, you pay attention to how you feel, pay attention to how they are, and really just pay attention. Some things will there'll be something that says something is not quite right.
Or it's just different. And then you can also, if you start looking at family tree too, autism is very genetic. And so if you see it, if there's a nephew or a niece or a brother that's been diagnosed, because a lot of women, in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are dating. Maybe they're back on the dating scene after a divorce. They're dating men who have nephews or nieces or even children that are the younger generation, where we're starting to recognize and catch autism in the school systems and so a lot of times it's that younger generation that is still in school that is being diagnosed. And so, and my clientele oftentimes realize that somebody is autistic when a child or a grandchild gets diagnosed, and they're like, oh, that I recognize myself or my partner in that. And so families are starting to put all these, oh, that's like Uncle Bob, or oh, that's like me, So if you're dating somebody and there are family members, even that have been diagnosed, then there's another sign, because it's very genetic.
Wow, Jodi, it's amazing. Thank you for that. And if you're watching this and you want to leave a comment, Jodi will get to you. I'm sure she'll answer your questions because this is really interesting. So let's say, look, I will take one of those. Thank you very much, Jodi. What are his spiritual requirements? Does he have a spirituality, a neurodiverse man?
That's a really good question. So neurodiverse men and women tend to be black and white type thinkers, all or nothing. So it's a lot of areas of their life are going to be on one extreme or the other. So what I've seen with spirituality is there's going to be a total lack of faith or spirituality, so they'll be atheists, or there'll be a very strong adherence to a faith of some kind. Right. And so it's whatever that faith is. It may be a cultural faith that they've been raised in. Yeah. And so that's something that can be, and those types of, that there's going to be a lot of structure to their faith. And so they're going to be very drawn to religious organizations and groups where there's a lot of preference for rule-based type religious organizations, because that gives them structure. Yeah. And they really, that feels comfortable for them. That can be a little problematic sometimes if they get involved in an organization that is not good, that can, and I'm not knocking any type of religious groups, but if they get involved with an organization that is swaying them in a way that's harmful to them, or culty or that kind of thing, they may get really stuck in like rigid type rule-based faith. Yeah. And so you might see that actually.
Yes, actually that's, I know. Yeah, that resonates with someone that I actually know. Yes.
Well, like I said, you definitely know people who are neurodiverse.
Yes.
This is not I knew somebody once. I promise you that right now in your life, there are probably 5 people that are neurodiverse that you don't, that you don't
not
realize.
Aware of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you just embrace it. And I actually think this person I'm thinking of is in leadership, is in sort of church leadership, and is very rigid. Very right and wrong, very
black and white.
Yeah, there's no kind of two ways about it, and it's always the criticism that this person gets all the time. But I think you can see that there's that devoutness, but it never feels like there's any wiggle room.
Yes, and that I've seen a lot of my clients here in the U.S. I've got clients all over the world, and the ones here though tend to be more of the Christian faith, and I've seen them really struggle sometimes with the not trying to figure out how to make sense of the husband. They really embrace their leadership role, but also look at wives as being submissive. And so there's just been a lot of, they're trying to figure out what that means and how to do that, because oftentimes the husbands are not understanding their wives' needs, or their girl in a dating situation. Not understanding that they're not husbands yet. But they're looking kind of to move in that direction. And so they may not understand emotional needs. And so they're wanting to lead. They're taking that very seriously, and their heart is in the right place. And they're wanting to be spiritual leaders of the family, but not recognizing that they don't understand how to meet the needs of their wives, or their, wives to me. And the women are not sure how to book the system, really. How do I communicate? How do I follow my own faith and be that submissive? And so there's just a lot of questions for them about how to follow their faith when their needs are not getting met. And so that's something that's come up.
Wow. Righty ho. Number 3. So what are their social expectations in terms of their spouse and their partner? Do they have any?
That their partner do the heavy lifting.
So socially too, when they're out and about meeting family and friends, they expect their partner to do
because they are very, very socially handicapped, and that's a buzzword, but they're very socially challenged. Most people who are neurodiverse don't understand the social. They're very socially awkward and struggle. They're introverts pretty much. They may enjoy being around people for a small period of time. That being an introvert doesn't necessarily mean that you just hole away and never want to be around people. But they don't know those nonverbals. They don't know what's appropriate when. They may totally misread a situation. So when you're dating someone, and let's say he's dating a woman and it's company Christmas party time, he may not understand the social expectation to his boss walks up and he may not understand, I need to introduce you to my boss. So he's going to expect you to just say, hi, I'm Jodi. I'm here with Dave or whatever. So those types, he's expecting you to know what to do. Right. And because later you're like, why didn't you introduce me to your boss? Yeah. Like, was I supposed to? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to be rude. Well, I'm standing right there beside you. Yeah. Or maybe he doesn't know that, Thanksgiving's coming up. Well, we have Thanksgiving here in the US. Christmas is coming up. We've been dating a year. And he says, well, I'm headed home for Christmas. Have a nice holiday, and you're like, what? So that's when he's expecting you to go, I think I'd like to, spend Christmas together. Maybe it's time to meet the family. Oh, you think, you think it's time? Yeah, I think so. Your family knows about me, right? Yeah. I've told you that I'm dating them. Yeah, I think it'd be time. Let's let me come home and meet them. And I'd like for you to meet mine. Oh, okay. And then you go meet the family and, you may literally walk in the door and he just does what he always does. You walk in the door and he may go in and plop down on the sofa and you're just kind of like, hi, everybody. He may have no idea what to do. Yeah. And so you want to talk about it before you get there and say, okay, I'm telling you, I'm not, I'm a little nervous. You tell him, I'm a little nervous about meeting your mom or, what typically happens within your family, who's usually there. What do you usually do when you get there, just prepare in advance because he a lot of times just won't know. Yeah.
I like that. And I love that for even neurotypical people, because I think we take a lot of things for granted and assume that we're going to understand the culture we're walking into. So
true. And every family is different.
Absolutely, because you have no idea. So obviously it's a little bit more important that you do it with a neurodiverse man, but I think we should do it with everybody.
I totally agree with
you. I love that because I'm sure somebody's thinking, gosh, that sounds like a lot of work, but actually relationships are work. I'm hearing you speak and I'm thinking, truth be told, whether it's neurotypical or neurodiverse, you're just going to have to put in a lot of work. It's just the kind of work, knowing what work it specifically. And I feel like you're giving us those tools right now. Alrighty. What are his emotional core needs? So we spoke a little bit about his emotions, but what would be his kind of core needs, do you think?
So we talked about how that range of emotion is oftentimes a lot more limited, but for him, he needs to be respected and acknowledged. Which is really true for most men, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a male trait, number one. Men who are neurodiverse have grown up in a world being different. And from a very young age, they understood they were different, but didn't know why. And many of them may have been diagnosed or may not have been diagnosed, but they're going to be aware that they're different. Yes. And so they may have been teased, bullied, given a hard time, even in their own families for their differences when their families didn't understand why they're different or what's different, what's going on, what's wrong with you, So from a partner, they need to be acknowledged and respected for who they are and for what they, what is good about them and what they do well. And because what we tend to do in relationships, we tend to hone in the things on the things that we don't like about somebody. We kind of scoot right on past the things that we really are, that are great and wonderful about them, because those are not thorns in our sides. The things that are great and working for us. We don't say those things out loud as much.
Right.
So they definitely need to be respected and acknowledged and affirmed.
Love that. Thank you for that. And what does he fear in his relationships or when he's dating?
I would say criticism and conflict. And the criticism mainly for kind of what I just said, but conflict because oftentimes he doesn't have the ability to understand why his partner's upset.
Right.
The emotion that she's bringing to him, the hurt that she's bringing to him is really confusing to him a lot of times. And so he will avoid it. Right. These guys they are avoiders. And so he really is terrified of conflict. And so oftentimes he will shut it down. And women feel shut down because he's scared of her emotional, the big emotions. And because he doesn't know how to fix it, he doesn't know what to do. And what she's saying, you hurt me. And she's wanting him to apologize for that, but he has no idea why he's apologizing. And so for someone who's logic oriented, it's a traffic jam, a gridlock traffic jam in his brain to say, I'm sorry for something that I don't know what I did, and not to understand what's happening. And so conflict is just a big, horrible, scary mess. And so he just will try to avoid it and shut it down and stay away from it.
You said something earlier, I'm not sure if it was when cameras were rolling or prior, where you said they do go through a lot of partners and a lot of jobs because typically relationships are quite difficult for them. Because I'm sure I heard that right. Because being with a woman is a very emotional situation. So chances are they do run away, I'm assuming, or they tend to, do they kind of leave a relationship if it's too emotionally charged, or do they?
Actually, no, that's interesting. And I'm glad you brought that up. They're less likely to leave a relationship.
Wow.
They will have had partners, but sometimes usually the partners are the ones that end up leaving. They do not like change because they want that structure and that routine.
Right.
So they're less likely to leave a relationship. Much less likely. So, and that's also one of the reasons why sometimes women who've been traumatized will stay in these relationships, because there's a fear of abandonment for those women, and these guys will stay even when there's a lot of dysfunction sometimes, but they're going to be fearful of the conflict. So they'll avoid the conflict, but they'll stay in the relationship. And oftentimes they'll tell their partner, I don't think there's anything really wrong. I don't understand why you're so upset. I don't know what the problem is. I think everything's fine. Everything seems fine to me. And so once you develop the ability to talk about what, you learn that you figure out that somebody's neurodiverse, and I have a whole communication program for neurodiverse relationships. It's a foundation of working with that's where we start. So once you learn how to communicate, then you can have a really successful relationship, because it's not all conflict. Because as you can imagine,
absolutely,
when you don't speak those same languages and somebody's upset and this person does, it's just, but they won't leave. They'll just say, let's just not talk about what's upsetting you. Everything seems fine. Let's don't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it, but let's just, and of course that really, really upsets, women. I mean, of course it does,
of course it does. Because
I'm not being heard. I'm not being heard. You're just muzzling me. And And he's like, well, is it really that bad?
I know. Oh my goodness, Jodi. I can just hear the black swans going, oh my goodness, I think that's my boyfriend. I think that's my husband. I think that's that guy I was dating. Because we've all kind of had that experience. You're thinking, what's going on? But I love that you're talking about communication, because it's really the hub. It's the foundation of any relationship, really. But I love that you are able to give women the tools, like, this is how you do it. And then when you have the tools, things work, right? Because I can imagine somebody thinking, gosh, there's no way I could make it work with such a guy. But you're saying to us, look, I can help you make it work. You just have to learn how to communicate. You just have to understand where they're coming from. And this is the whole point of this series of The Secret of a Man's Mind, because I feel like as women in general, we don't want to understand the men come from a whole different place in general, right? And that men are different.
That's what really contributes to it not working usually, is we want to keep forcing them into our neurotypical box.
Yes.
And one of the examples that I give about how it can work, and as a matter of fact, on my podcast tomorrow, my two children, actually, I'm introducing them to the world. Wow. And my daughter's 19 and she's neurodiverse. She was originally got the Aspergers diagnosis when she was 5. Yeah. And my son's not. And so I talk about them all the time in the work that I do. I've talked about them, my daughter, for years. And we know that their dad is on the spectrum. He doesn't claim it, but I absolutely know it. And it was definitely a factor in my marriage. And then my children see it too. But I talk about, we have neurodiverse relationships, not just with the people we date. We have them with our friends and for them, it's a sibling relationship. For me, it's mother-daughter with my daughter. And she has a neurodiverse relationship with her dad. It's both of them are autistic.
Wow.
And so I help people to understand we can't, we don't just walk away from each other in our family because somebody's neurodiverse. We have figured out how to make it work. And my daughter and her brother are teenagers and they've had to learn how to communicate, and they have this love-hate relationship, but they're both very mature, and it is workable. Yeah. My best friend is autistic. Wow. She's autistic, and we make it work, but we have to figure out how to translate each other. And it's the same for dating relationships, but we tend in those dating relationships to kind of fall back into our scripts that we, our expectations, our dreams, our hopes, and our aspirations, and what we have, that framework that we have for what that relationship's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to be. And we keep trying to put our partner in that box. Yeah. And we have to take accountability for not doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that we talk about love, because love is that, it is caring about other person and seeing how we can serve them and not being so self-seeking and so self-indulgent.
It's not about putting them in our box.
No,
they need to be for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Alrighty then. So what do they desire that they're afraid to ask for, do you think?
Neurodiverse people are not typically afraid to speak their mind. They're quite blunt to a fault. That's one of the things that they're very blunt. That's a complaint they have about us neurotypicals, is that we use passive communication, and they're like, I don't know what you're trying to say. So they're not nearly as likely to hold back on what they want. And what we tend to do is not believe them. We take what they say and apply a meaning, or try to read between the lines and figure out what they really meant, and then take our own meaning away from it. Yeah. And we then pollute what they actually have said to us. and oftentimes it's because what they've said is not what we really wanted to hear.
And I tell you what, Jodi, isn't that true even for neurotypical men? I think women do it, period. I do. And I think the more blunt a man is, the more we tell ourselves it can't possibly be true. Because
that's not really
that's not
what they meant.
Exactly. It's not part of my story that I'm making or my script. That's not the part you're supposed to play. So we think, maybe in time, or what they meant was, I think maybe I may have upset them, but I think they really want what I want. And then we set ourselves up on a thing. But I love that. I was thinking, gosh, I'm very blunt, so I don't know what the hell I am. Maybe maybe I need to sing too. I think I get criticized for being a little bit blunt, but I'm a very kind of clear. I like clear communication. It works very, very well for me. So maybe this is why I'm attracted to these neurodiverse men, and because I love it. I actually find it really attractive when a man is straight, very direct. Love it. I love it.
Probably the same for me too, because I don't want to have to try to figure it out. Just tell me so I'll know.
Absolutely. I'm like, give it to me black and white. And I can see why I have sort of had quite a few relationships with such men, because it's actually works really well for me. Okay. So what is their position on money and women?
Yeah. So again, that kind of just depends on the script that he's got. And that can go back to cultural background and what he's learned about his role as a man in a relationship. And so that can be different for each man. Most of the men that I've worked with here in the United States, even though they may see themselves as providers, they're still going to see there's my money and there's your money, and then maybe there's our money. And they may have a dating script where they pay for some meals and some dates and that kind of thing. But again, they're looking for that independent woman who's capable. Right. Now I do see couples down the road who are married, and women are stay-at-home moms, and they do find that a lot of men are looking for that. That's part of the family dynamic and the role they see as themselves as being a provider. But there can also be, it just depends on the script they have. You know, they may see themselves as being in charge of the money, and I'll give you what you need to spend. And a woman may be like, I'm not real good with that. You know? So, I mean, but I think those are conversations that we all need to have. So I don't think there's a neurodiverse way of thinking about money, but it just really depends on what his particular script is. He is going to stick to that script. You need to find out what it is.
Find out what it is, ladies. Find out what it is. And if you don't know how to do that, do the communication course that Jodie's created. All right. What are his judgments on a woman's sexual history? Her, you know, whether she's got a big body count or she's had some sexual trauma in her past. Does he have any particular special thoughts around that? Or
that's actually a really important question, because going back to the scripting, whatever his scripts are, like the beliefs, the narratives that he has about morality, are going to be really important, because he may have some pretty deep-seated values about morality. And because if he doesn't speak that emotional language as well, men on the spectrum struggle with what we call theory of mind or cognitive empathy. What this means is the ability to understand the perspective or point of view of someone else in a given moment. And oftentimes they can do it once prompted, but sometimes they still struggle. We all do this. We all struggle with this sometimes. Just think about politics.
Yes.
You know,
yes. Well,
we struggle sometimes to understand the perspective of others.
Yes.
But people who are neurodiverse struggle with it even more sometimes. So if there is a narrative about morality, and that's I've known women who were really blindsided at times when they've been dating a man and she knew he really respected her and really valued her and thought she was this really great human being. And they get to that conversation about their sexual history. And then, she's had several partners, and all of a sudden he calls her a slut. He's like, wow, you've been really a slut. And she's like, whoa, where did that come from? And he's like, well, and it's been like, it's just been very off-putting. And he isn't necessarily making a judgment of her at that moment, but that for him, his definition of someone who's had multiple partners is that they're slutty. And he may still be fine with having a relationship with her, but for her in that moment, that's like very
painful, difficult. Yeah.
Very painful. And yes. And so it's something that it just really depends on the man and what those values are, what those narratives are, what those scripts are. And the trauma is something that he may have a hard time understanding. He may be able to logically know, if you share with him, I had this trauma, I've had this background, if there's sexual trauma, or you may be able to tell him, and he may really say, oh, wow, that must have been very hard. Some may not be able to say that must have been hard for you. I've known of men respond, well, it's in the past. That it's over. It's in the past. Why is it still a problem? And it's like, what do you mean? That sounds very hard and uncaring. For them in a logical sequencing type of thing. Similarly, I've known many neurotypical partners get very upset when there's been a death in the family and their neurodiverse partner grieves. They'll grieve oftentimes for a short period of time, and then say, well, they're dead, they're gone, I can't do anything about it, life goes on. And it's a fairly short period of time. And my autistic clients are usually like, yeah, I mean, that's true, there's nothing we can do. Where it feels too short for neurotypicals a lot of times. Right. And so this could be something that can come up with previous trauma. If a woman's had previous trauma of any kind, not just sexual, but any kind, a neurodiverse man may struggle to understand the longevity of the emotional difficult.
Yeah. Whoa. You see, this is really interesting, because I know that a neurotypical woman, or a woman who does not know that her man is neurodiverse, would think, what a jerk. He said, what? Oh my God, he's such a jerk, you know, and cast judgment. And that would be natural to do, unless you kind of knew that perhaps it's coming from a whole different place. And from what I'm hearing from you, Jodi, it's really about this man's scripting that he's working out in most things, what he learned, what he saw which is also true for neurotypical people. We're all running the script of what we saw, but definitely it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're less able to move away from that scripting. Can they move away, or can they grow and learn new things, or are they going to stick closer to the script?
They can learn new scripts. They can. But the other thing I want to say is that we associate as neurotypicals judgment and meaning to those scripts. So, for example, if a neurodiverse man says, "Wow, you were really a slut," we now feel judged, right?
Yes, of course.
And we feel that influence that affects their current assessment of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
A neurodiverse man very easily is focusing on the word "were," and he's seeing linearly, "Wow, back then you were really slutty, but you're not now. So back then you were really slutty."
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, "Yeah, but that was then. This is now."
Yeah.
And he's just looking at on a timeline. You were really promiscuous back then, but this is who you are now. You're still the woman that I respect and care about and want to date now. And so for him, he's just making an observation about what you've told him about back then. This is now. He's not judging. There's no judgment to it at all. So yeah. So it's not even but we're feeling like, oh my gosh, can you every time that we get intimate, are you going to be thinking that? And he's like, no, I mean, you're not doing it now. Right. I mean, you're just dating me. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where we have to kind of go, wait, I think really differently than you.
Yeah.
And so we're the one assigning the meaning to it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not.
Right.
So we have to stop and go, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Right.
But as far as the scripts go, yes. And it depends on the individual.
Right.
Some individuals are going to get stuck on those scripts and stay there. Others absolutely can learn new scripts and can grow and learn. It really depends on the individual. And that's what you want to look for. You don't want to date potential.
Right.
You want to look for someone who you see is capable of insight and introspection. And, oh yeah, I see that about me. I see that script doesn't fit here anymore.
Right.
And I can change that. I can update that.
Right.
You don't want to date somebody who, well, I think down the road, they're going to be able to do that because that's you're really hoping for something versus seeing it now.
Wow. So you've said a heck of a lot. The question is how they handle conflict and how we should handle conflict. I feel like you've touched on so many things, but if you have one final or something else that you might like to add to the body of work and the conversation that we've had today that would help us handle conflict with a neurodiverse man.
Yeah. So in that communication program that I talked about, one of the core things that I teach, and I think this applies to all of us, honestly, is I teach how to pick battles because we tend to come to our partner, I think all of us, and this is really true for neurodiverse relationships, with everything. And we also come to our partners with things that we could probably go to our girlfriends. So number one, our partners are not our girlfriends. And sometimes we want them to be our girlfriends and they're just not. But number two, I have this scale that I use that I call my 2 to 10 scale. And it's not 0 to 10 because pretty much any kind of something that bugs us is at least a 2, and 10 is like a deal breaker. That's like that's like, I can't live this way, or I can't live without this, or what, it's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Everything's at least a 2.
Yeah.
And I teach people, you've got to learn how to place things, figure out how important something is before you actually bring it up. And I say, ask yourself, how important is this to me? And how much is this impacting my life? Those 2 questions. And then rate it on that scale. And anything that's up above a 5 or 6 is a conversation worth having. If it's down here in the 2, 3, 4 range, toss it. Because we just don't need to bring everything up. It's okay to let a lot go. And especially in a neurodiverse relationship, the more you can unclutter your conversations with, you left the towel on the floor, or, why did you call me last night after, usually you call me at 10. Why did you call me at 10:30 instead? I mean, does it matter? He called, there's so many conversations we can just let go.
Yeah.
Because that conflict that I was talking about is what the neurodiverse man is just so terrified of, because he doesn't know how to understand why you're upset.
Right.
And so, and that doesn't mean to just minimize your feelings, not at all, but just to recognize what's important and what's not.
Yeah. And, you know, in this whole conversation, Jodi, we are totally forgetting that you're in love with this man, or you love this man, or you've developed a really strong emotional connection to this man. So you obviously want it to work. You know, I know when I came to you and I was like, Jodi, you were like, I genuinely wanted it to work. I wasn't being like, I'm out of here, because we forget that we do connect to these humans, and they connect to us in their way, and we want it to work. So part of making any relationship work is acquiescing. You know, it's compromise, it's letting some things go, and it's forgiving some things. And that's the bit about relationships we don't hear enough about. We don't see enough of that on social media. We see the hand holding and the flowers and the romance and the couple looking in each other's eyes. But that is like the holiday of a relationship.
It is the holiday, and it's the Hollywood, and it's not really what I think most successful relationships look like at all.
They're built on systematic communication, of being clear, giving each other a chance, giving each other space,
and a lot of grace.
Oh my goodness. Pretty much in any relationship that is going to be worth having and lasting, you know?
Yes.
And we have to get good at relationships, and we have to know that we have to learn to do relationships as well. And what I love about you is that you are sent by God to help neurodiverse people and neurotypical people actually have loving, beautiful relationships in a world that they may not have, you know?
Thank you, Chengi.
So thank you for coming. Did you want to say anything before we close?
No, I think, the one other thing, this is going to sound funny because it's just like a last minute add in.
That's
timers. Timers are the best thing ever in, I think, all relationships, but neurodiverse relationships, because one of the things I hear happening a lot is that these conversations end up lasting for hours and hours. And, you know, sometimes when we get into these fights or these arguments and they just go on and on and on and on, and people are flooded by the end, and everybody's in like fight or flight mode, and nothing productive comes out of it. I just tell couples, set a timer, and everybody agree to go to your corners when the timer goes off. Even if you're still in the middle of the conversation, you have to just call a time, you call a pause, because then everybody kind of gets to, you know, stabilize and regulate. Set a timer for 30 minutes. But more importantly, it's kind of what you were just saying. We all need to recognize that what we're bringing to every relationship is our own. We talk about baggage, but we think of it as negative. You know, we bring our baggage. But I actually have reframed that in that we all have our little suitcase that we're carrying around with us everywhere we go. And it has everything in it that makes us who we are. It's not just the negative stuff, but it's everything. It's our all of our experiences and our personality and our DNA and our just everything is in there. And we bring our suitcase with us, and our partners bring our suitcase with us, or the people that we're dating. And all of that comes to every single interaction. Wow. Every single interaction. And so it influences how we show up and what we say and what we expect and what we want and what we wish for. And they have their own suitcase full of all that stuff too. So we just need to be respectful and recognize and remember that we're us and they're them. And we're never going to be the exact same. We're just two very uniquely different human beings.
I love it. I love it. I love sharing this relationship space with you, Jodi. I want you to please tell us where we can find you. Where can we find you on your socials? What are your handles so we can come and
It's pretty easy. So jodicarlton.com is my website, and my socials are just the Jodi Carlton. So like Instagram, TikTok, Jodi Carlton. You can find me on YouTube under Jodi Carlton. If you Facebook Jodi Carlton, you'll find me. So I've tried to make it pretty easy.
Yes. Easy helps, Jodi. And your podcast is called The Neurodiverse.
Yeah, it's called Your Neurodiverse Relationship. That's the only one that's not Jodi Carlton. But if you put in my name, you'll find it. But it's your Neurodiverse Relationship. And you can go to my website and find it.
So jodicarlton.com, everybody.
Yes. And that's Jodi with an I.
Jodi with an I.
Yes.
And I will put all of the links in the description. So you can just click the link and head on over. Thank you so much for coming to enlighten us, Jodi.
Thank you. And I have, as you know, I'm always sending people to you, and love what you do too, because it's so important and so needed. And you're doing amazing work too.
Thank you,
you have been for years.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It means the world coming from somebody who knows so much. But yeah, it's such a gift. I've known you for, we've kind of known each other.
Years now. Yeah,
it's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And we've been meaning to have this conversation. And every time I see you post something on Instagram, I'm like, I need to have her on my channel. And then we can't quite make the times work. And then we're just so busy. I'm so blessed. And I feel like the timing is perfect. I feel like the Black Swan Relationship Academy is full of very intelligent, loving, warm women who are open-minded and open-hearted. And I really feel like they'll really benefit from this talk. And I'm sure they'll be stalking you for more information.
Great.
So, my darling, we're going to say goodbye to everybody. We'll see you all later. Take care of you, everyone. Bye-bye now.
Bye.